people being taken from their beds at night, and possibly a hybrid program, you know? So we have a pattern here where humans and animals are being affected by the grays.
The men in uniform finally spoke. After 40 years of denials, former military and intelligence figures tied to the Dulce Base story have admitted, on the record, what really happened beneath the New Mexico desert. And it is not what the legend promised. Their words come down to one chilling phrase: people need to know. But here is the part that should put a knot in your stomach. What they confess to is somehow stranger and darker than aliens. It starts in 1980 with a patriotic electronics expert named Paul Bennewitz carrying his films onto Kirtland Air Force Base, asking for help, and getting a yes that destroyed him. A legend built on purpose. Here is what almost no version of this story tells you up front. The famous part, the 7-level underground base beneath the New Mexico desert, the aliens, the genetic labs, the human experiments. None of it has ever been confirmed. No verified document. No confirmed photograph of an interior.
The UFOs, and this is the hot spot for it all, and that's how I found out about it, basically through Gabe Valdez.
Nothing. Mainstream historians and journalists treat Dulce Base as a conspiracy theory, full stop. But the reason the legend feels real isn't that someone found aliens. It's that real military men, doing real classified work, deliberately fed a real person a flood of lies. The legend itself was built on purpose, and they were the ones who built it.
They're using the blood to create life.
And the strangest detail of all is that decades later, some of those men are still here, still talking, still telling the stories, which is exactly why this title isn't clickbait. People did speak out. The question is what they were really confessing to. To understand it, you have to go back before the base. Before Bennewitz even looked at the sky, you have to start with a dead cow in a field. The cow in the field. Picture a New Mexico state policeman standing over a carcass in the dark. It is the mid-1970s, somewhere in the high country around Dulce, on the Jicarilla Apache Nation. The cow is dead and wrong, soft tissue gone, an ear, the eyes, the tongue, organs, and the cuts are too clean. No blood pooled in the dirt, no drag marks, no predator tracks circling in, and on the ground near the animal, things that should not be there. A gas mask, glow sticks, radar chaff. The officer crouches in the cold, runs his light over the gear, and refuses the easy answer everyone keeps offering him, which is coyotes. Coyotes do not carry chaff. Coyotes do not wear masks. Somebody was here, and somebody wanted to be able to breathe while they worked. His name was Gabe Valdez. He was the New Mexico state policeman, officially assigned to the cattle mutilations and the strange lights reports across that whole stretch of country. And he took it seriously in a way nobody around him did. He didn't file a one-line report and move on.
Whatever's going on here, it seems like electrical things are affected. If it is interdimensional, some of this may only show up on certain equipment.
He photographed sites. He logged the gear. He kept the files until they filled a garage. In 1978, he ran an actual experiment with a rancher and a retired scientist. They moved more than 100 head of cattle under ultraviolet light hunting for residue. And a lab in Albuquerque came back with potassium levels reported far above normal. That is not a man chasing a campfire story. That is a cop building a case. Hold on to what Valdez actually said, because the legend mangles it constantly. He pointed at that gear in the dirt and made a blunt point. Predators don't leave gas masks and glow sticks behind. People do. He talked about silent, sophisticated aircraft moving over the area at night. His instinct was not little gray men. His instinct was that someone with resources and clearance was operating out here and didn't want to be seen. Sit with that, because where Valdez actually landed is the exact opposite of the myth that stole his name. He didn't conclude aliens. He concluded the government. The man listening to the sky. Now, the second thread, the one this whole thing actually turns on. His name was Paul Bennewitz. Bennewitz was not a man in a trailer with a notebook. He ran a company in Albuquerque called Thunder Scientific that built high-precision instruments and held contracts with the U.S. military, including the Air Force. His company and his home sat right up against Kirtland Air Force Base. That single fact, where his fence line was, is the hinge this entire story swings on. Around July 1979, he marked the start of what he later called a personally funded study into UFOs. From his own property, he began noticing unusual lights over the base at night, and he started using his own equipment to record strange radio signals coming from that direction. He filmed, he logged. The more he gathered, the more certain he became that he was tracking something real. And here's the part the legend never wants you to know, because it ruins the alien version. At the start, Bennewitz didn't think aliens at all. He thought he might be seeing secret American programs, or maybe Soviet activity. He was worried about national security. So, he did exactly what a patriotic defense contractor would do. He carried his films and tapes onto Kirtland and asked the Air Force to look at what he'd found, sit with how ordinary that decision was. A man trying to help his country. That decision is what destroyed him. When the Air Force said yes, when Bennewitz brought his evidence onto the base, the system looked on the surface like it was working. Officers listened, he was allowed to brief people, investigators were sent.
Some people in town say the base is run by aliens working with our federal government to conduct mind control and genetic experiments.
But the man his material reached was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations named Richard C. Doty. And Doty did not do what an honest investigator does. He didn't debunk it. He didn't quietly walk Bennewitz back from the edge. By Doty's own later accounts and by multiple documented histories of this affair, he did the opposite. He encouraged the belief. He got close. He cultivated a personal relationship, earned the man's trust, and began handing him fabricated material built to confirm and expand exactly the fears Bennewitz already had. This is the documented spine, and it's why this video's title can say military men spoke out without lying. Doty has publicly admitted over the years that while stationed at Kirtland, he was tasked with hoaxing documents and feeding false information to UFO researchers, with Bennewitz a primary target, and he has said he acted under orders. The other name that matters is William Moore, the man who'd co-written a bestseller on Roswell. At a UFO conference in 1989, Moore admitted on the record that he had cooperated in feeding disinformation to Bennewitz, and said outright that part of the intent was to push the man toward a mental breakdown. That is not a skeptic guessing. That is a participant describing the operation in public, while it was still recent enough to deny, and choosing not to deny it. One of the most cited bricks in the whole structure is a single piece of paper. By the documented chronology, Doty showed Moore a teletype referencing a secret program, and a version of that material, reworked to introduce the now infamous MJ-12 framing, made its way toward Bennewitz. That's what the Dulce legend is actually built from. Not a crash saucer, a forged memo passed down a chain of people who knew it was fake. Sit with how dark that is. A private citizen walks onto a military base trying to do the right thing, and instead of being corrected, he is handed documents with official-looking seals, shown staged briefings hinting at secret treaties with aliens, pointed toward places to keep watching. Every time he comes back shaking, an actual Air Force officer tells him he's on to something. I'm telling you this here, before the worst of it, because the story is about to turn. It stops being a spy story and becomes a tragedy. If that's the kind of thing you follow all the way down, subscribe now so you don't lose the thread, because what they did next was decide who else deserved the same treatment. The trap was perfect because it used Bennewitz's own strengths against him. His skill made the signals real, his patriotism made him report them, his persistence made him the easiest man in America to destroy with his own conclusions. He wasn't fooled because he was gullible, he was fooled because he was good at his job and they knew it. Why they did it. So why would the United States Air Force spend this much effort dismantling one electronics engineer in Albuquerque? The grounded answer has nothing to do with aliens.
It was J-Rod's mission or duty to help reverse engineer technology that was apparently from the 1953 Kingman UFO crash.
It's about what Bennewitz's antennas were actually pointed at. This was the Cold War, and the land around Kirtland was some of the most sensitive ground in the country. Sandia National Laboratories sat right there. Primary nuclear weapons research. Built into the Manzano Mountains beside the base was a hardened nuclear weapons storage complex. Classified programs ran in that area that produced unusual lights and unusual electronic signatures the public was never meant to see or hear. Now, look. again at what Bennewitz was doing. A trained electronics expert, parked at the fence line of that complex, recording signals and filming lights over restricted ground, then carrying it around, trying to get senators interested. From a counterintelligence chair, it almost doesn't matter whether he understood what he had. The danger was that he was collecting and broadcasting the real signatures of classified work to anyone who'd listen. Strip away the saucers, and the logic is cold and simple. You don't arrest him. That confirms there's something to find. You don't correct him. That aims him straight at the real thing. You bury the real signal under an avalanche of fake aliens. You make him so loud, so strange, and so wrong that no serious person will ever take a word he says seriously again. The secret stays hidden, not because nobody's looking, but because the one man looking has been turned into a joke. But sit with the question that opens up the second you accept that. If they do that to one harmless engineer standing at a fence line, who else got the same treatment? Because they didn't stop at Bennewitz, and the next person they reached for was someone the public was supposed to trust. The journalist. They reached for the disinformation didn't stay aimed at one obsessive man at a fence line. It pushed outward into the wider UFO research world, because that world was exactly where the leaks were feared. And the most striking documented example isn't a fellow believer, it's a journalist. By the documented accounts of this affair, an investigative reporter working on a serious television documentary about UFOs was drawn into the same circle of contacts. She was brought onto an Air Force base. She was shown extraordinary-looking documents. She was promised the things every reporter dreams of: footage of landings, interviews with officers who'd met aliens, even access that would prove the biggest story of the century. None of it materialized. The proof kept being just out of reach, one more meeting away, until the promised access evaporated entirely and the documentary collapsed. Sit with the shape of that. The believer gets fed lies until he breaks. The credible journalist gets dazzled with bait until her project dies.
The Dulce papers surfaced in the 1980s, and they documented the levels of experimentation going on at that secret base.
Different targets, same machine. And in both cases, the effect is identical. Whatever was real stays buried under the spectacle. That is the tell. This wasn't sloppy denial, it was aimed. And once you see the aim, you have to ask the next question, which is where this story finally collides with a town called Dulce. The name gets a location. Here is where the two threads braid and where the word Dulce finally arrives. Bennewitz didn't invent the underground base idea out of nothing. The cattle mutilation panic Valdez had been documenting was already in the air across that border country, already feeding talk of strange craft and government secrecy. The accounts describe the two men crossing paths, Bennewitz telling Valdez he was seeing the same kind of lights over Kirtland that people reported near Dulce. Bennewitz went up to that country. He saw lights there too. Two threads, one not. And then, convinced he was intercepting communications from alien craft, Bennewitz concluded the signals were coming from a hidden facility, and he gave it a name, Dulce Base, under Archuleta Mesa, near the small town of Dulce, New Mexico. A secret installation run jointly by the military and aliens, where humans were experimented on. By the 1980s, he had written the whole thing up in a document he titled Project Beta, a sprawling mythology of a war between humanity and gray aliens centered on a base at Dulce. Sit with this. Almost everything the modern legend repeats, the levels, the treaty, the labs, the underground firefight, traces back through Bennewitz and the lies poured into him. The Dulce Base was not discovered. It was, in the most literal sense, written into existence by a man whose informants were lying to him on purpose. So, when someone tells you the story tonight, ask the only question that matters: who told the first version? And who was whispering in his ear? The sun sets it straight. There is one voice that cuts through all of it, and it belongs to the family of the man who started the cattle thread. Gabe Valdez died in 2011 and left behind a garage full of files. His son, Greg Valdez, himself a former state police employee and later a federal agent, went through all of it and published a book built on his father's actual case files. And what the son says contradicts the legend that grew out of his father's name, flatly. Greg Valdez has stated plainly that there are no tunnels under Archuleta Mesa. No reptilian alien tunnels, no gray alien tunnels. No military tunnels either. He says his father never believed there was alien activity, that Gabe always pointed at the government, not at extraterrestrials. The way the family lays it out, the lights people kept seeing were human aircraft, and the bizarre phenomena traced back to secret human activity in a region with real nuclear history, and the 1996 forest fire on the Mesa, which conspiracy circles instantly read as the government burning away evidence of the base.
It's conceivable that they're coming in through tunnels and actually drilling out the space for this underground base from the bottom up.
Was, according to Greg Valdez, exactly what it looked like to the firefighters who worked it, dry lightning in a drought. Strip away the saucers, and even the man whose investigations helped birth the myth was, by his own son's account, chasing a human cover-up. So, why won't the story die? And why does the loudest version of it come from a man who swears he was inside? The man who was there. Now the most dramatic version, because it's the one that goes viral, and it's the one you have to be most careful with. In the mid-1990s, a man named Phil Schneider toured the lecture circuit, presenting himself as a former government geologist and engineer who'd worked on deep underground construction. His signature story was a firefight, that while drilling at Dulce in 1979, his team broke into a section controlled by aliens. A battle erupted. He killed 2 of them. He was wounded. He lost fingers. And roughly 60 people died down there. 7 levels, each with its own grim purpose, and hundreds more bases like it. It needs to be said cleanly, none of it has ever been proven. Researchers tracing the chronology found the underground firefight idea didn't even start with him. It was already circulating, tied to earlier claims associated with figures like John Lear, before Schneider attached himself to it and moved the setting to Dulce. He brought no verifiable evidence. He had documents and photos he waved at audiences. Nothing survived scrutiny. He did have missing fingers, which proves a hand injury, and nothing about aliens. He died in 1996, and that death was instantly absorbed into the mythology instead of examined, turned into a martyrdom by the same crowd that needed his story to be true. That is the whole pattern in one man. He didn't add evidence, he added drama, and drama travels faster than evidence ever has. A claim with no proof, repeated until the repetition itself starts to feel like proof. Each storyteller adds a floor to a building nobody has ever been inside. So peel all of it away and ask the question the legend is built to stop you from asking. What is actually under there? And why does the real answer make the lie possible in the first place? What was actually underground? Here's the trap. And it's worth understanding because it's how every story like this works. The United States genuinely does build things underground, and that part isn't paranoia. The hardened complex inside the Manzano Mountains beside Kirtland is really there, really classified for much of its history, really tied to the nation's nuclear program. The lab work at Sandia National Laboratories is real and sensitive, and in that broader region there was a real underground nuclear event in the 1960s. A documented program that set off a nuclear explosion to fracture rock and free trapped natural gas. On its own,
quite possible, we are standing in the shadow of the Dulce Base.
That sounds exactly like something a conspiracy would invent, except it actually happened and sits in the public record. Now, watch the move the legend makes. It doesn't deny any of that. It points at the real bunkers and the real secrecy and says, if all of that is true and was hidden, why not the aliens too? But that's a sleight of hand. A verified bunker is evidence of a bunker. It is not evidence of what storytellers wish were inside it. The secrecy was real, so any story about secrecy felt plausible. And that is precisely the gap the lie was engineered to live in. There is no verified evidence of alien laboratories, hybrid programs, an underground war, or a multi-level extraterrestrial base at Dulce. Half a century, and not one confirmable interior photograph, blueprint, or witness who checks out. Which leaves a colder question than whether it's real. The honest version of this story has existed in plain sight for years. So, why did the lie win anyway? How a myth goes viral. The reason you've heard of Dulce at all is that it found the perfect delivery system, decade after decade. In the 1980s, it moved through UFO conferences, fringe newsletters, and late-night radio, where Project Beta and the disinformation tangled around it reached a hungry audience. Tabloids loved it, books extended it, People who admitted, sometimes openly, to fabricating or exaggerating material kept it growing. Then the early internet handed every claim a permanent home and an infinite copy machine. Television specials kept circling back to Archuleta Mesa. By the time most people meet Dulce Base, it's been through 40 years of retelling, every pass sanding off the boring truth and polishing the alien parts. And here's what should genuinely unsettle you. The correction has been public for a long time, and it barely scratched the legend. The whole affair was laid out in detail in a 2005 book that put Bennewitz, national security, and the deliberate creation of a modern UFO myth right in its title. It was examined again in a later book about UFO disinformation that became a documentary built around interviews with the people involved, including Doty on camera talking about what he did. The honest version has been sitting on shelves and screens for 2 decades. The version that travels is still the 7-level base and the firefight. The truth was available the entire time. The myth simply made better content. Sit with what that means about every scary story you'll be told after this one, including, if you're honest, the reason you clicked on this: the human cost. Because there is a person at the bottom of all this, and the legend almost never says his name, the disinformation worked. Bennewitz didn't get rich, didn't get the fame he wanted, didn't get vindicated. He got sick.
And we could see where the animal was lifted up from its legs, because it had clamp marks on the legs, and their legs were broken.
The accounts describe a man whose paranoia deepened year after year as the fake confirmations kept arriving. Every forged page, every staged hint, landing not as a warning, but as proof he was right. That is the cruelest part of the design. The lies were shaped to fit the exact contours of his fear. So resisting them felt like denial, and accepting them felt like courage. He came to believe aliens were controlling people through devices. He believed an invasion was coming. By August 1988, he was accusing his own wife of being under alien control. His family had him admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Albuquerque. He never fully came back to the life or the work he'd had. He died in 2003, and by then, the legend he'd been steered into building had already outgrown him completely. It no longer needed Paul Bennewitz at all. Strip away the saucers and look at what's left. A capable, patriotic man carried his films onto a military base trying to warn his country. And the institution he trusted decided the cleanest fix for its security problem was to take his grip on reality apart on purpose. They didn't just discredit his claims. They reached into the part of a person that decides what's real, and they pried it loose, and it stayed loose for the rest of his life. One of the men who helped do it has spent the years since telling these stories to audiences, building a following out of the same machinery that broke him. That is what "people need to know" actually means here, not aliens under New Mexico. What was done to a human being by men in uniform with a straight face, and how rarely anyone says his name when they tell the scary version. The mystery that remains. So, where does that leave the thing under the mesa? There is no verified evidence that Dulce Base exists. No confirmed facility, no aliens, no underground war, no treaty. The most careful people who've looked at this, including the family of the investigator, whose own work helped start it, point at human secrecy and human deception. The mesa is, as far as anyone has ever been able to show, just a mesa. But the legend revealed something completely real. It showed how Cold War secrecy, intelligence operations, and deliberate disinformation could reach into the mind of one ordinary man and, through him, manufacture one of the most durable UFO myths in American history. The real conspiracy at Dulce was never about hiding aliens. It may have been about convincing one man, and through him, all of us, that they were there. And the strangest part is that it still works. People still drive to that quiet town on the Jicarilla Apache Nation, look up at Archuleta Mesa, and feel certain. The base was an invention. The belief in it is the thing that turned out to be unkillable. So, tell me one thing in the comments. After everything you just heard, do you think the men who ran this operation owe Bennewitz's family something, all these decades later? Yes or no, and why? Read a few replies before you go. The disagreements get sharp. And if you want the other side of this world, stay on the channel. Next, we go into the real hardened complex beside Kirtland, the one that actually exists and that almost nobody talks about. That one isn't a theory.